and interact with us.
Um, this is Chris Root, and I'm introducing the session, and my video is not working. And that is really a shame, but it's the best I can do at the moment. So please forgive me for that. We've got other wonderful people who you can see, so that's a good thing. If you could put your name and city and organization in the chat, that would be great. It helps us to know who's joining us. We would appreciate that. Um, we've our last time together on a webinar was 2 months ago, and a lot of people have done a lot of work. A lot of you folks who are on, and we really have a big thank you for that. And we will give you an update during this webinar on what's been going on the legislative front. That's going to be a little bit later in the webinar. Although we think the outcome looks good, we'll give you the full story a little bit later. We realize that many of us want to be watching the debate at 7 o'clock between the candidates in the Democratic primary for the Senate seat. Obviously, we didn't know about that debate when we set this time. So we're going to, before 7 o'clock, tell you what we need people to do next. We will get to the next step before 7 o'clock. So we are promising that, even though we've got a full agenda. Zaina, can you go to the agenda page, the agenda slide next? Great. So um, we're going to spend a little bit of time on the overall campaign strategy, and then we'll insert there what's coming up next on July 14th when we need your action. Then we're going to go to what we've learned recently about MIBA, do some preparation for making public comment before MEDC, and then an update on what happened last week on the legislative front. So that's the plan for tonight. And with that, we will turn over to the campaign strategy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Talia. I'm with JBP Detroit, and excited to be here. Excited that you're all here. Really briefly, this is a campaign sort of helmed by a coalition of 4 organizations: Michigan Divest, U.S. Palestine Community Network Detroit, Jewish Voice for Peace Detroit, and Engineers Against Apartheid. We came together maybe, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago around a shared goal, which was to move public funds out of the Michigan Israel Business Accelerator, which I will tell you a little bit more. I mean, I'm sure many of you already know a little bit about it, but I'll tell you about as we move into the next slide. Thanks, Anna. So sort of to zoom out, the campaign rationale hinges on 2 kind of central beliefs. Michigan's economy should not be a war economy, and our state should break economic and political ties with Israel as part of a broader strategy to end the genocide in Palestine. We're focused on the Michigan Israel Business Accelerator. Go to the next slide, sorry. And then I'll probably ask you to go back. So the Michigan Israel Business Accelerator, as I'm sure many of you know, is a nonprofit that brokers business contracts and relationships between Michigan and Israel, primarily in the weapons and defense industry. Since 2018, MIBA has received over $6 million in public funds from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. With that $6 million, MIBA proudly boasts that they have generated 45 million in economic activity. So the inverse of that boast is that we know that if we can defund MIBA or move public funds out of MIBA, we actually have a much greater impact on the weapons and defense industry. So we aim to end public funds to MIBA to advance state divestment from Israel and reduce Michigan's overall investments in the war economy. Next slide, please. So again, our goal, divest all public funds from MIBA. And our current demand is that the Michigan Economic Development Corporation terminate its current $650,000 contract and commit not to fund MEBA in the future. So later we'll talk about the legislature and a proposal that was in and that we believe was not funded, but our current and primary target is the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and we're asking them to terminate this contract, which they can do within 30 days, and commit not to fund MEBA in the future. So MEBA receives about half of its funding from MEDC, so half of its funding from public funding. We understand MEBA would probably find funds elsewhere, but our public money should not be going. And we think it'll have a broader kind of symbolic and political impact to win this demand, and we believe that we can win. Next, please. So, how we win. We believe that if we escalate public pressure on MEDC over their support for MEBA, then MEDC will commit not to renew the funding in order to resolve this public relations crisis, because MEDC already has quite a weak institutional reputation and it is experiencing a legitimacy crisis. So we're hoping that beyond appealing to kind of morality, MEDC's top executives are likely vulnerable to losing their jobs over further conflict of interest concerns. MEDC is already disliked across the political spectrum by Republicans and Democrats alike, and we're hoping that if we increase public pressure, both on the, the grounds of morality, should not be funding a genocide, an economic argument, but also that people will want to, save face, save the institution's face, and do the right thing. If not for the right reasons, do the right thing anyway, which we would see as a win. Next, please. This is just sort of a smattering of MEDC in the recent news. Just embroiled in scandal, embezzlement, awarding grants to ineligible recipients, right? So they're already quite in the news and would like to stay out of the news or be in the news for good reasons. So we're really hoping to give them a good reason to be in the news, a win for us, and a win for them. Next, please. So our strategy thus far has been trying to do some sort of backdoor brokering, but really to flood MEDC's quarterly meetings with public comments from across the state, voicing opposition to MEBA's funding. So at the last MEDC quarterly meeting, we had over 40 public commenters in person and online. So we filled the room, and almost every single public comment voiced opposition. And Dalal will talk us through more how to craft a public testimony, but really powerful public statements. And at the last MEDC meeting, where they typically don't acknowledge public comments, they acknowledged the presence and the opposition in the room, and said that they would put this on the top of their financial subcommittee meeting agenda. We have no updates to share from that yet, so we'll be escalating. And we'll remind you of this date throughout the webinar, but the next MEDC meeting is a week today, July 14th, and we're going to be showing up in force again to give public comment, escalating our demands. Another tactic, which we haven't executed yet, but will, is to hold public demonstrations, press conferences, direct actions to draw attention to MEDC, putting them further in the public eye and the news media. Again, they're already suffering legitimacy crisis. The last thing they want is more bad press. Use op-eds, news coverage, and social media to raise awareness and increase public pressure on MEDC. So we were recently at the Reindustrialize conference, part of a protest organized by Engineers Against Apartheid a few weeks ago. And we brought, we spoke about MEBA. So we're really trying to just get MEBA on the map in a way that they think they want to be, but actually they don't want to be. And continue to solicit support from organizations around the state and from public officials in Lansing. Israel is rapidly losing legitimacy as a U.S. partner, and across the country and certainly in the state, people are not excited about public funds going to Israel. Next, please. If we win, then what? So if MEDC divests from MEBA, what have we achieved? Material gains. We've weakened a key broker in growing Michigan's war economy. So again, if we want to stop the genocide, MEBA is only one player, but they're a key player, right? They broker a lot of contracts. They've brought weapons manufacturers to the state. They want to make Southeast Michigan, in their own words, hub of Israeli defense technology. So this, is currently resonant with our governors and, probably the next governor's vision to make Michigan the arsenal of democracy. And we know that that really just means perpetuating the genocide and then other wars, conflicts, and violence. So, we're focused on Israel and weakening ties, and we can do that if we win. We'll have achieved political gains. We'll have weakened the political legitimacy of economic development strategy pegged to the war industry, and we'll have made key strategic gains. So we'll have weakened public acceptability of doing business with Israel as part of a broader strategy to end the occupation, apartheid, and genocide. So part of a broader boycott, divest, and sanction strategy, which we know has been effective in the past in other conflicts and has been effective thus far in weakening Israel's legitimacy and material strength. Next, I believe, is our next action. So as I mentioned, and as we'll keep reminding you, because we really want to pack the room, the virtual room and the real room, the next MEDC Executive Board meeting is a week today. 9 a.m. sharp is when public comments start. There was a link here that we'll share again. You have to register the day before. We'll be giving more information about that, but mark your calendars. Please come online and in person for the next MEDC board meeting to give public comment voicing your opposition to public funds going to MEBA.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that as the reminder that this is the next action that's coming up, and we are enthusiastically welcoming everybody to show up. 11 people gave public comments at the March MEDC meeting. 31 people gave comments at the May MEDC meeting. Next week is the one after that, and we would really like to get a good showing again of folks coming out either in person or online. And Matt is up next for some interesting things we've learned that are pertinent to what people might be able to say and be thinking about. And we'll have Q&A time at the end rather than inserting it so that we can sort of keep as, the content as a whole. But if you have questions for Talia about strategy and for Matt about what we've been learning, store them up and we'll have time at the end. You're on, Matt. You can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Talia. So it's been a key part of our strategy to obtain through public records what this whole thing is about MEBA and what they do. And the more we learn, the wilder and more interesting and more disturbing really it gets in terms of exactly their role in Michigan. And when we first found this contract in 2026 and learned that MEBA's getting $650,000, it doesn't seem like, in terms of the grand scope of things, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of money. We discussed quite at great length at the last webinar about how they encourage weapons manufacturers, in particular Israeli weapons companies, to come to Michigan and sort of serve as a conduit to funnel more state money than what they get to the weapons industry. And we're really learning quite a bit about the things that they do beyond just the sort of narrow funding that they get. They really serve a deeper cultural role connecting Michigan to Israel. We found quite a bit more detail about their what they call trade delegations to Israel that they take every year. And it's pretty incredible stuff because every year, and of course, 2025, everybody should know exactly what's going on in Gaza and Palestine and Lebanon. Is widely recognized that Israel's committing a genocide, and the fact that they're taking state officials, taking cultural elites in our state, who we'll get into. We're going to name some names. We'll talk about and bringing all these people to Israel, and it's they call it a trade delegation, but it's really much more than that. The 2025 delegation, which, by the way, we got these emails and they became public record. We learned about the specifics of the trade delegation because MEDC, which is a state organization, they basically get a free ticket every year on one of these trade delegations. So MEBA gets in touch with MEDC to try to recruit one of their high level MEDC people to come along. And in doing so, they give guest lists, they give, itineraries, all sorts of really detailed information about their trips to Israel. In 2025, they held such a trip where people who went on this trade delegation met personally with Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Herzog. They met with IOF, quote unquote IDF leaders, went to Rafael Systems, personally visited this large Israeli weapons manufacturer. They traveled to the Nova Music Festival, which is a site of, October 7th, one of the kibbutzim that was involved in October 7th. And it's really just a pretty horrific propaganda trip where they're meeting with the highest levels of Israeli and Zionist leaders. Of course, this delegation includes no real representation of any Palestinian voices, no delegation to Gaza, no meeting with the Palestinian genocide survivors or Palestinians who are facing settler violence in the West Bank. Just imagine if our state sponsored such a trip and took our political leaders to see that side of things, what kind of different world we might be living in. But you can go to the next slide, Zaina. But of course, that's not at all what this trip is. And in that trip, here's some of the people that they took. And this is in 2025. The president of MSU, Kevin Guskiewicz, he went on a trip to Israel. Wayne State President Kimberly Espy, very interesting. She was on the guest list, but she backed out. And the CEO of MEBA said she's not going for obvious reasons. That's what he said. Which, if you think about what was happening in late 2025, what obvious reasons might have caused her not to go. Shout out to our Palestine activists at Wayne State for causing quite a stir and a lot of commotion, a lot of necessary commotion directed against the university because we believe that their activism actually got the president of Wayne State to back off and not go because it would have been rightly horrible, shameful PR that she would have garnered. The Detroit Pistons vice chairman went to Israel on this trip. Like, what the heck is MEBA taking the Detroit Pistons vice chairman to Israel for? Oakland University Board of Trustees chair by the name of Joe Jones. I mean, these are academic leaders, leaders in the academic field, in the university field. Detroit News editor Nolan Finley was on the list, although he appears to have backed out. And folks from Michigan Divest might remember Nolan Finley wrote a quite interesting article about us after we got the state retirement system to divest from Israel bonds. He sort of went off and encouraged everybody to buy Israel bonds. So this is a columnist, a so-called thought leader who has a column at the Detroit News who's going on these or being invited to these propaganda trips. Henry Ford Health CEO Rob Riney was on the list, although he appears to have backed out. There were several versions of this list. But it's worth noting, and particularly with hospitals, Beaumont Health Board member Evan Weiner was also on the list to go to Israel. Henry Ford Health has a lot of connections to MEBA. The top Henry Ford Health executive, Lisa Prasad, is on the board of MEBA. It's quite disgraceful that hospitals in our state are going to a country that's committing one of the worst crimes of our lifetime, committing a genocide. Obviously, one of the worst public health crises in the world. Israel's killed over 1,700 healthcare workers in Gaza, destroyed Gaza's health system. The hospitals in Michigan really have no business doing anything involved with Israel other than criticizing. Of course, Dr. Osama Bousafia is a Palestinian pediatrician. He's the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital. He's being tortured by Israel right now. We are seeking further guest lists, and we're going to talk a little bit more about our battle for information because this is just 1 year. I mean, this is what we uncovered for 1 year. We can only imagine some of the other things that we can uncover. Like, we really have the tip of the iceberg in terms of the information that we would like to have, but what we've seen so far is quite interesting. You can go to the next slide, Zana. I guess we'll talk a little bit more about our sort of battle for information because where we left last time at our last webinar, the MEDC had wanted to charge us about $10,000 for these emails, which include not only the MEDC sort of guest list and information about their delegations to Israel, but also any communications. There's two board members or two high-level MEDC members who are also MEBA board members. So anything that mentions MEBA or Israel is fair game in terms of public records and our access to it. We've been going back and forth with MEDC to try to get that information. And we're thinking about next steps. We're thinking very hard. There's sort of a legal process, and we may have some news about that pretty soon. But the next thing we're working toward is the public MEDC meeting. But we're not going to let this part of our strategy lie, because this information is very key and should be known to the public what our public dollars are financing. Okay, so we have the board members. We touched on this before. There are two MEBA board members who sit in high-level MEDC positions. The CEO of MEDC, which is about the highest you can get, is a MEBA executive board member. His name is Quentin Messer, and also Alyssa Tracy, who's the MEDC International Trade Director, who is also MEDC's contract administrator for their grant, for MEBA's grant from MEDC this year, is also a MEBA executive board member. So we've been digging into the sort of conflict of interest element of this, and you can go to the next slide, Zana. The MEBA contract has some very applicable provisions right in the contract. So meaning MEDC has given this money to MEBA and says, as a term of our grant, here are some things that you're bound by. Section 10 of their agreement says MEBA, quote, will not hire any employee of the MEDC to perform any services covered by this agreement without prior written approval from the chief executive officer of the MEDC. Of course, the chief executive officer is a MEBA board member, but Alyssa Tracy is the contract administrator who is administering this contract and supervising it for MEBA's compliance. She sits on the board of MEBA and is the director of the part of MEDC that granted the money for MEBA. Is a clear issue in terms of conflict of interest provisions in their own contract, in the contract between these two entities. Section 14 of the same contract says, quote, except as has been disclosed to the MEDC, MEBA shall not, quote, acquire any interest, direct or indirect, that would conflict in any matter with MEBA's performance of its obligations under this agreement or otherwise create the appearance of impropriety. Of course, there certainly is an appearance of impropriety here. These are things to think about who are going to be at the next public meeting, MEDC meeting, because in our contacts with MEDC, we've learned that they're quite receptive to this part of the scandal. I mean, we can talk to them about the genocide, wherever they fall politically, as a sort of neutral conflict of interest, sort of government corruption angle. MEDC's eyebrows really are raising, and other government entities' eyes are raising in this regard. Another section of this contract, MEBA shall not, quote, accept anything of value based on an understanding that the actions of MEBA or its affiliates or either its employees on behalf of any of the MEDC would be an influence. MEBA shall not attempt to influence any MEDC employee of the direct or indirect offer of anything of value. So, I mean, I don't even know if you'd call it influence at this point. If a high-level state employee is also a MEBA board member, I mean, we're in a situation where our high-level state employees represent Israel. I mean, they're on the board of an organization whose mission is to represent Israel. So it's hard to even apply these conflict of interest provisions to such a sort of base level problem. You can go to the next slide. We will continue with this because it's not only a contract issue, but an issue of Michigan law, which sets out very clear guidelines, very clear standards about what public officials can and can't do in the sort of public contracts that they can be involved in. This is Michigan law, and the title of this law is Standards of Conduct for Public Officers and Employees. Quote, a public officer or employee shall not engage in or accept employment or render services when that employment may tend to impair his or her independence of judgment or action in the performance of official duties. The next provision, the public officer or employee shall not participate in the negotiation or execution of contracts or any other regulation or supervision relating to a business entity in which the public officer or employee has a financial or personal interest. Such a clear violation here, such a clear personal interest when a MEBA board member is the contract administrator whose job is to oversee the contract for which they sit on both sides of the aisle. You can go to the next slide. Okay. Thank you, Zana. The next law that is quite applicable, title of the law is Contracts of Public Servants with Public Entities. So Michigan law specifies this precise issue that we're dealing with right now. It says, quote, a public servant shall not directly, indirectly solicit any contract between the public entity of which he or she is an officer or employee and any firm of which he or she is a partner member of employee. What else can you say? Amoeba board member involved in overseeing MEDC's contract for which she is the head of the part of MEDC that oversees MEBA for which she's also part of. The second part, a public servant shall not represent either party in the transaction. And under this law, a public servant is required to disclose potential conflicts to that body that approves the contract. The public body must make a public record of the disclosure and take other safeguards. And one of the things that we requested through our public records requests is for whether they followed those requirements. They're supposed to make certain disclosures that are supposed to be part of the public record, and they have to take other safeguards. And we submitted a request, and MEDC is taking a very long period of time. They said it'd be 90 business days. It's quite a while ago after we paid a deposit. It's going to end up being a bit over $300 to get the information that we requested, and we hope to get it from MEDC quite soon. It is worth noting with this law, though, so I'm an attorney, and a lot of times, unfortunately, you see where these very strongly written laws that at the end say, well, these are just pretty much words and are not enforceable. And that, unfortunately, is the situation here. Despite these very clear violations, the law that we just went over allows only allows MEDC to have the power to seek to nullify any portion of the contract, and the public does not have a right to enforce it. And it's the same with MEBA's contract with MEDC. There's a provision of the contract that provides for a default if there's a violation by MEBA of the conflict of interest provisions, which it very clearly was. But the question is whether MEDC is going to enforce the law against itself. Nevertheless, I mean, as Talia said, MEDC is very vulnerable, rightly so, to the criticism they've been getting over all sorts of corruption, conflict of interest issues. And I think we'll be very receptive to this take on the relationship between MEBA and MEDC, because really a textbook example of everything that's wrong with our government here. Of course, we're first and foremost dedicated to breaking the links between Michigan and the Israeli genocide, but even bigger, it's just a level of issues of accountability and government corruption that really should concern anybody. With that, I'll hand it to our next person. I think we have Dalal next.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to go over the public comment section just to make sure everybody feels comfortable with making a public comment. So if we want to go to the next slide, please. And just to let you know, I am with the USPCN Detroit and with the Michigan Coalition Against Genocide, alongside our other organizations working here. And this has just been, it's been wonderful working with everyone, but it's also been very, very heartbreaking to find out just every day, as Matt said, more and more information about how complicit and how connected we are to this Israeli war machine and genocide, while our communities are suffering here. So for our July 14 the MEDC executive board meeting, we have a public comment option. You can either do it in person, virtual, or email. And I'm going to walk you through some of the steps you need to do in order to make an effective public comment and not miss the deadline. Also, if anybody here hasn't made any type of public comments in the past, it's completely okay. And we're here to help you feel more comfortable and confident in making your public comment, whether it's in personal or virtual. And before we get into that, oh, I'm sorry, could you back up one? I think we're on the wrong slide. Let's go to the public comment before we begin. Let's do a check-in. I think it's out of order. It's go one ahead, right there. Thank you. And then we'll go back to the one about your voice matters. So before I get into it anymore, I just want to do a quick check-in. If you all would be kind enough to go into the chat, type in if you think you're going to be making a public or virtual comment on July 14, and also one word that describes how you feel about speaking publicly. I also dropped in the chat, we can drop it again. No, it's still there. There's a form, if you look, there's a link, a Google Doc link. It's a form that if you are planning to come out, whether it's in person, virtual, or email, if you could please fill out that form, we'd really appreciate it. Okay, next slide. Now we can go to your voice matters. So why public comments matter? Obviously, it's because your voice matters. Our goal is to flood MEDC's quarterly meetings with public comments and opposition to their MIBA funding. And as Matt said, or Talia, each time we go, our numbers are growing, and we're hoping this time we can exceed the 31 people that were there last time. Public comment gives us, the community members, a chance to speak directly to MEDC executive board members and let them know where we stand. It allows our voice and our comments to become documented and part of the public record. It shows community support to terminate funding for MIBA. It shows that we are concerned about how our public funds are being used. And that's a huge concern for everyone in the US and in Michigan. Specifically for Michigan in terms of MIBA. Also, we need to hold our decision makers accountable. They need to see that we're paying attention. And I think for so long, MIBA has been riding under the radar, collecting money without anybody paying attention to them. And we need now more than ever to let our decision makers know that we are paying attention. And we care where our money is going for many, many reasons. Next slide, please. Next one. So keep in mind that in order to make a public comment in person, there's no deadline. But for virtual and email, there is, and I'll go over those specifics in a second. But there are 3 ways to make a public comment. It's in person, it's in virtual, and it's in email. Keep in mind that as our numbers are growing, there are time limitations set by MEDC. And so their policy and rules say that dependent on how many people show up in public, for a public comment or virtual comment will depend on how much time they have. So if we have less than 20 people, they would give us a whole 3 minutes. But we're hoping, as last time, we were way above the 20, and we're hoping this time again, we'll go way even above that. So anytime there's 21 or more people, either virtual or in person, they cut our speaking time down to 1 minute and 30 seconds. So when you prepare your comment, except for email. Email, there's no limitation, but for virtual in person, please kind of keep in mind you have that 1 minute and 30-second window to work with. Next slide, please. So if you're making a public comment in person, right before the meeting that is being held in Lansing, you would just go right to the MEDC building front desk, sign in. From there, you go into the board meeting. They'll have a sign-up sheet right on their podium. Everyone that wants to make a public comment will need to sign up. Just put your first and last name. You'll just have a seat and wait to be called. The meeting will start at 9 a.m. this time. Typically, we've been starting at 10, but they will be starting at 9 a.m. on July 14. So have a seat at 9 a.m. Wait for your name to be called. You just go right up to the podium, make your public comment. And as I said, typically it's 3 minutes or less. This time I'm pretty sure we'll have less. So please build your comments within a 1.5 minute time frame. Next, please. And then for virtual comments, you do have to turn in your registration request to speak virtually. It has to be completed before 3 p.m. the day before the MEDC meeting. So you will have to make sure to go online. We dropped the link already, and go in there, register. It's a simple registration. Just make sure that you do it before 3 p.m. the day before the meeting. When you're on virtual, last time there was a few glitches with people who were speaking virtually. So we just want to highlight some of the things you need to look out for so you don't get overlooked and skipped. Make sure your Zoom name matches the name you're registered with. Also, the MEDC moderator, when he calls your name, if you're on Zoom, they're going to call your name. But if you're dialing in from your phone, they're going to just call out your last 4 digits of your phone number. And then once you're called on, if you're using Zoom, you have to click raise your hand when you hear your name, the raise your hand option. And then you'll be able to unmute your microphone so you can speak. If you don't do that, they skip you. If you're calling in with your phone, the equivalent of raising your hand when calling in from your phone would be *9. And that allows them to know that you're ready to speak. And then you would click *6 or *6 to unmute yourself. And again, let's build our comments based on that 1.5 minute mark. Next slide, please. And then if you're submitting an email, which is the written public comment, those have to be submitted by noon the day before the meeting. So any email that you need to send out, you can submit a supporting document if you want, along with your written public comment or just your public comment. It has to be submitted by noon the day before the meeting. That would be July 13. And there is the MEDC email. We'll drop that in the chat for you guys as well. Or actually, you can find it in the link that Talia provided to register for the virtual and for the, it's all in there. They have the email as well. Next one, please. So how to make an effective public comment. So keep in mind, you only have 1.5 minutes, and every public comment, whether it's written or whether it's verbal, virtual, in person, always introduce yourself. Make sure that you let them know what your name, your full name, the city you live in, and any personal information you'd like to share, such as, I'm a Palestinian American, I'm a mother, and I want my tax dollars used here for schools and not to kill children. I'm demanding that MEDC terminate the contract for MIBA and not renew any new contracts and use that money here for the state of Michigan. That's just an example. That hits everything in my slide. You're using some personal information that you'd like to share. I should have said Dearborn, Michigan, but you would say your name, your city, any personal information, why this issue matters to you. And since there's such limited time, we're asking that you try to focus your comments to one or two main points. And if that's most important to you, or if you have more than one point and you're listening to all the other public comments come in, you can decide which point you want to focus on depending on what others have said. So if everybody's focusing on education or environment, or maybe you want to focus on another topic that's close to your heart. But in the end, that's not easy for everyone to do. So, I mean, it's fine if you don't, but that's either way, just try to focus on one main thing. I don't know if you'll have enough time to focus on 2 points. Next one, please. So tips for building confidence and success with your public comment. What we recommend is to practice your comment beforehand, write it out. It could be a piece of paper, it could be your phone, it's all good. Be sure that you practice it and stay within that time limit of 1 minute and 30 seconds. And it's perfectly fine to read from your notes. You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to give eye contact. If you can, that's great, but it's not required. Remember, speaking calmly and respectfully helps keep the board focused on your message and allows us to be heard. So getting angry and disrespectful is just going to shut down the conversation and just shut down our ability to get through to them. So let's keep that in mind when we make our comments as well, whether they're written or verbal. And also be sure that your comments have a clear ask. Make sure that you're making it very clear to the MEDC Executive Board Committee that you are requesting that they terminate the contract and use our public funds to blank whatever is important to you, to fund our schools, our environments, or local businesses, whatever is important to you, to use that money here locally to build our communities. Next slide, please. So for those who would like to, when we're done with the webinar, we're going to have Q&A. And then after the Q&A, we'll have some time to practice making a public comment for anyone who's interested. If anyone wants to stay on and get help on making a specific public comment for you personally, or if you just want to practice it with us, we're more than happy to stay on and help with that. But also just want to remind you to fill out that form that's in the chat. I'll drop it again. If you're planning to make any type of, whether it's public, virtual, in person, or email, we're asking that you please fill out that form, and I'll drop it one more time in the chat. So thank you all for coming tonight. And then I'm gonna pass it on to the next speaker, which is Chris.
We have gone from the very broad strategy to deep research to very practical, specific advice. We're trying to cover everything to prepare people for 1 week from today. So we focused on MEDC because that's what's coming up next. But we also want to be sure to let you know what happened last week on the budget, because a lot of people worked on that with us. Dalal and Zaina and I have been kind of the legislative committee of the steering committee, focused on the legislature, and what a privilege to work with them. If they know so many people,
Likewise.
well, you folks, know a lot of people who we need to communicate with, and if you don't know them, you know somebody who does know them. It's been tremendous that's what it takes to put this together, to have an understanding of what's going on, and then how do we reach people we need to talk to. So we can go to the next slide. So a number of you will remember that we learned in the spring that both a member of the House, Representative Aragona, and a member of the Senate, Senator Victory, requested a $1 million for MIBA in the Michigan budget, which seems to many of us a complete outrage that the Michigan budget, which is so inadequate to meet the needs of Michiganders, that anybody would dare to ask for $1 million to promote business involvement with Israel. But there's an opportunity to do it, so they took that opportunity. Clearly, MIBA is trying to find any way that they can get public money to support their private, corporate, especially military objectives. So the way to do that in the budget is what's called a legislatively directed spending item, or LDSI, used to be called an earmark. Um, and there were more than 1,000 of these requests. And as you can tell from even the MIBA situation, there were frequently requests from both the House side and the Senate side. So it's not, you can't just add 786 requests in the House and 550 in the Senate and say there were that many unique requests. But the idea is there was at least there was 2.5 billion of requests from the House, probably about another 1.6 billion in the Senate. So obviously not all of those were going to get funded, but it's a way you can try to get funding, is to get people to ask for these earmarks. So you can go on to the next slide. So the budget was passed 8 o'clock in the morning, July 3rd. And I think the House and the Senate had been in session for something like 23 hours by that time. They just kept going and going. They're in the version of the bill that is now available, which is called the Senate concurred version, which is the next to last formalized text of the bill. There is a list of 135 LSDIs. This is in a list in the portion of the budget that is about the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, which is the category that MIBA is part of. So there's a list of 135 LDSIs that are funded with the dollar amount, and the total amount is $125.3 million. And then another part of the bill is actually supplemental funding for the fiscal year we're in now that ends September 30. There are 2 more LDSIs there, totaling 2.5 million. Neither of those are for MIBA either. So this looks like good news. It looks like MIBA is not included in either of these lists. The level of transparency, the level of lack of transparency is really quite extraordinary. And we can go to the next slide. Our strategy was we knew that that there would not be a vote of everybody in the House and Senate on every LDSI. You can see with the huge number that there were, that would be impossible. So we knew that the senior people on the Appropriations Committee and then the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate would be the key people in the negotiations. There was no point in us trying to talk to Matt Hall and the Speaker of the House. So our focus was really on pretty much 2 people, Winnie Brinks in Grand Rapids, who's the Majority Leader in the Senate, and Sarah Anthony in Lansing, who's the chair of the Appropriations Committee. Both of them were extremely busy the last couple weeks before the budget, and I'm sure even before that. What we tried to do was talk with allies inside the legislature to see if they could talk, particularly people on the Appropriations Committee, to see if they could talk to these folks internally. And then we did some work externally, both people in Grand Rapids and Lansing, trying to reach Senator Brinks and Senator Anthony. In both of those cities, We were not successful in getting meetings. But they certainly heard from us in other ways, um, on the phone and in emails and efforts to organize a meeting. Um, they knew we were uh, where we stood. And, the whole point was we want to get an agreement with them that the budget should be for Michigan. We were not trying to go any further than that. That was what we needed in order to succeed in not letting MIBA get $1 million this way. Some of you have asked, well, how is it that MIBA isn't in the bill? We do not know. Number one, we are not 100% certain that it is not in the bill. The reason for that is our experience with last year's budget. In last year's budget, there was a list of LDSIs in labor and economic opportunity that were funded. There were, I think, 21 names of, requests on that list. March of this year, in other words, like 5 months later, after the bill was passed, we got to see the full list of LDSIs that various departments in the government were administering. The list from Labor and Economic Opportunity had about 135 LDSIs. So the budget said there were 22, and then it turned into 135. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this year. The amount that they had to work with for the budget is less this year. They were talking for several days before the final budget that there would be 135 million for all the LDSIs. And that's what those that are printed add up to. But we just aren't certain. We've tried to contact a couple of staff yesterday and today, and for very good reason, most of them aren't in the office since they were working through the night a couple of the days last week. Can we go on to the next slide? So we should get definite evidence by the beginning of August, because 30 days after the budget is adopted, which will be August 3rd, the legislature must send a list of all the LDSIs to the the state budget office. The legislature isn't covered by the Freedom of Information Act, but the state budget office is. So we should be able to request the list that the state budget office receives on August 4th. We will keep trying to get answers from people in the legislature before that, but there's a difference between hearing something from somebody and seeing an actual document. And so we will try to get both. So we've also been getting queries from people, well, could they try again? Could MIBA try to get money from the budget again? The answer is yes, they can. Now, the budget for the next fiscal year, which will start October 1 of 2027, they'll start working on that in January of 2027. And there is the LDSI request must be made public, and we know where those lists are kept online in the House and the Senate. So come January of 2027, we'll start looking at the lists again to see if MIBA is going to try again. I mentioned that the lack of transparency is extraordinary. Just one comment. I think within 48 hours of the morning of July 3, 46 bills were passed in 48 hours that had something to do politically with something in the budget. All these bills hadn't been passed before, and they all were agreed to somehow all together. the budget bill was not even printed at the time the vote occurred. Now there may have been, very close to finished versions that were available for a couple of hours before the legislators had to vote. But it was really a learning experience to see that all these enormous politically important decisions are voted on by people who do not have an opportunity to see what's in the bills. So our feeling like, gee, it's hard to know for sure about MIBA. Think about the fact that we are electing representatives who are forced by the system they're a part of to pass 46 bills in 48 hours. There's an incredible amount. They don't know what they're voting on. So that's just a lesson in how our system works that we are trying to work within. So we don't know whether the top negotiators actually talked about MIBA. I don't know if we ever will know, but it seems very likely that it's not in the bill that was adopted, and we will definitely get that list in early August that is the definitive list of all of these LDSIs that are passed, and we'll let you know. And that's where we are at the moment. Next slide. So this is back to Talia, a kind of summation of what things we need to be doing. And then we'll go to Q&A.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Dalal. Thanks, everybody, for being here. A lot of you have already done these things, but this is a list of things to do to take action. So sign the My Money Out of MIBA petition. We are still collecting signatures. You can sign it online, and you can share that link with everybody you know. You can join the My Money Out of MIBA Signal group for updates and other ways to participate. We'll be sharing the slides on our link tree. There'll be lots of ways for you to get this information. I know this is a long URL. Attend the upcoming July 14th MEDC meeting to give public comment. So as Dalal said, after Q&A, you can stay on if you want to kind of workshop or just talk about what you might want to say for public comment. It can be nerve-wracking, but once you do it once, it's actually kind of exhilarating to really use your voice in a system where we have very little opportunity to really tell people who make decisions on our behalf with our money what you think about that. And it's really empowering to do that. So I hope anyone who's nervous feels excited and empowered to do that. And like we said, we want to pack the online room and pack the real room in Lansing. And then another thing you can do is as an organization, if you're part of an organization that hasn't yet endorsed the campaign, you can use this Google form, which again, we'll be sharing in the chat, and we'll share on our link tree, and we'll share in the Signal group to endorse the campaign. And if you want to get involved and you can reach out to any of us, you can put your name in the chat and say, somebody reach out to me. We're, hoping to keep working and keep escalating until we win. Did I leave anything else out? I don't think so.
Sounds good. I'm putting into the chat the Signal group URL and the form, Google form for organizations that want to endorse the campaign that haven't done that yet. So
Right.
you can just click on those and make use of them. So this is our time for questions and comments.
So if you do have a question that you'd like to ask directly instead of going through the chat, raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute and then you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm calling in from my phone. I couldn't figure it out on my phone otherwise. Where could I access these links given I'm on my phone? I'm called in.
We have a link tree that has a lot of information. Have you used Linktree before?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's Linktree slash and then my money out of MIBA. Just type it in without any spaces. And that's where we're
Okay,
putting
thank
a
you.
lot of things. Mhm.
And you should be able to, if you're not driving, you should be able to just click anywhere in your screen and your little chat box should pop up on your phone. There should be, if
Oh
you
no, I
touch,
called in.
oh, you called in. I'm sorry. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Glad you were
Thank
able to
you.
do
We'll
that.
also be sending out a follow-up to everyone who registered, so we have your email. So we'll send out all these links to everyone who registered for this webinar. So I know we've like thrown a lot of links and a lot of information, and we'll send out an email with all of this information in one place in the next 2 days.
Perfect. Thank you.
Go ahead, Judith.
Um, I'm curious. I mean, Israel, through its minions or people, is working so hard to get money. I don't know if it's just Michigan or other states also. And I'm also wondering, do other countries go to this length to try to get state, U.S. state monies and weapons?
I can speak a little bit to that, Judith. And if others want to jump in, more than welcome. The MEDC does have other trade centers for other countries and other regions. And we haven't done a whole ton of research on that. And there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with international trade and promoting international trade. And that's part of, MEDC has an international trade division, but with Israel, it is absolutely not a neutrality. I mean, the whole foundational, ideology of Israel is not neutral. And MIBA is not trying to do anything innocuous. It really is a very different category of um, creating the bonds because Israel knows that they need to um, maintain political relationships, especially now when so many normal people are just completely outraged. So we're not aware of anything that's quite like this. Um, I mean, there could be some. Who knows? I mean, there are links between MEDC and other countries. This is by far the most scandalous that we know about. And I'm not aware of like board members and high level MEDC executives sitting on this sort of nakedly pro-Israel organization. I mean, just to build off that a little bit more. That's a good question.
There's a question in the chat. Do you think MIBA will stop asking for funding if they get denied funding in this round of the budget expenditures? Is there a way for them to get funding when nobody is looking? I think we could apply that to both the legislature and MEDC. The next possibility, just on the legislature, the next budget won't get started until January next year. So there's nothing really they can do about trying to get into the budget before January. And they can keep trying, absolutely. Maybe, Matt, you want to address the MEDC?
Sure. To Steve's question, from the information, which again is really the tip of the iceberg information-wise, but from what we have seen from MIBA's board meeting um, minutes, we have them because I guess the only upside of two high-level MEDC representatives being on the board of MIBA is when they send the minutes to them on their public emails, it becomes public record. So we know what they're thinking, and we know that this is very much funding is very much on their mind. MEDC funding is in jeopardy, and there's less and less to go around just in general. And we believe we don't have, we're fighting for as much information as we get, but we believe this 2026 is the first year that they sought legislative funding because they knew the MEDC funding was in jeopardy. We saw that they hired a lobbying firm to help them with the legislative aspect of getting money from our state budget. They have applied in 2025. They applied to 2 grants. They were denied for one of them, a $350,000 one, and this bigger $650,000 one was granted. But and there are many grants that are offered through the state that we know that MEBA has its eyes on. And if there's a way that they can get those grants, they will. It is very much a topic of their conversation. In 2025, about 70% of their funding came from state funds. And they realize, and they talk about it in their meetings, that that funding is in jeopardy, and they are trying to switch and ramp up their private donations efforts. So they know that that is an issue, just as we know, and we know that they're vulnerable here. And we're gonna keep an eye on it. I did just today. I put in a request for any grant requests that they've made since we last asked. So one of the things we had to do is just keep monitoring them, and who knows, something might pop up that we find, and that's a big part of us keeping our ear to the ground. Sorry, Chris, or whoever jumped in.
Everything you're saying is really valuable, and you pointed out that MIBA asked for 2 MEDC grants last year and only got one of them, and the one they did get is smaller than the ones they have been getting in previous years. Another thing that MIBA does regularly is inform Israeli companies of MEDC grants that they might be able to apply for directly. And they did that for, I think it was Raphael, and that they helped Raphael get 3 grants. Now, that was not part of a MIBA grant, but it was part of public Michigan money going to assist Israeli firms to invest here. So they've got their eye out on any possible way of applying for money for themselves or the people they're serving.
Exactly. What's Capture Systems? That was the Israeli weapons company, but
Thanks.
everything you said is correct.
Thanks.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from Mark. I will ask you to unmute.
Yes, I was just curious, how many years has MEBA been receiving public funds from the state of Michigan? Is this something that's relatively new, just the last few years, or has this been going on for, a decade or more?
Chris, do you know the answer? I know you looked into the history quite a bit.
We know that they have gotten grants over a 6-year period from starting in 2018, and we know that that has totaled so far $6 million. There was a sort of a previous iteration of MIBA that may have gotten some money earlier than that we haven't really tracked down. And it's interesting. Another interesting thing of looking at that 6 years of history, for 4 of those years, they went through a part of MEDC called the Michigan Strategic Fund. And there was a vote on whether to approve a grant to MIBA and to others by the Michigan Strategic Fund. The last 2 years, they did not go through that same process. And we've been talking about ways MEDC is vulnerable, both in terms of conflicts of interest and in terms of lack of transparency. And it looks like there just isn't much of a paper trail of how the last two grants were decided upon. We have not found any public body or part of a public body that made a formal decision, which makes one all the more concerned about the staff people at MEDC who are linked to MIBA, and they are very powerful staff, and that they may have had a great deal to do with getting the last 2 years of grants. So here's another question. Won't the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act in the Congress, which is virtually impossible to stop, put an end to the need for MIBA and other grant application processes? I can respond to that. What exists in the NDAA is something entirely new, which is a section that will create a interconnection between the US and Israeli military technology in developing US weapons. So it will mean that the Israeli linkage with the US is now in the military procurement part of the federal government, rather than the foreign military sales that we are accustomed to seeing come up. It's about $3 billion a year, where people in the Congress could, investigate, hold hearings, and have votes about trying to get rid of those foreign military sales. Now the idea is that Israeli military firms, including state-owned military firms of Israel, will be intertwined with US military producers, so that these firms will make in profits what they, perhaps the equivalent of what they've been getting in military sales, military procurement, financing. That is incredibly important. It is new. There's no question that Israel and the Trump administration are trying to push this through very quickly, while they still have Republican control of both the House and the Senate. But that does not mean that they aren't looking for other kinds of money as well. And I've heard this kind of argument or the kind of question you're raising of, well, does that mean that if this passes next year, will there not be $3 billion worth of foreign military financing? Because we're still in the 10-year MOU that allows that. They could quite easily get both. The provision in the NDAA, I believe one version of it, it's a 20-year agreement. So, and it will be impenetrable once that happens. So I think the core issue you're raising is that this is going to be hugely important, very difficult to stop, and very difficult to put the skids on once it gets going. And I agree with you on that. That doesn't mean they won't keep trying to do other things with the federal government in the US, and that they won't keep trying to get Michigan money. And there are things like MIBA in 15 other states. You know, capitalists always want more. They don't say, gee, we'll do it this way instead, and that'll be sufficient. I don't have any reason to think that they will stop trying to get money and linkages otherwise from the federal government or in the state. One last thing about the NDAA provision, there is not going to be a vote on it in the House of Representatives. The Rules Committee decided not to allow a vote on an amendment that had been offered. So there isn't even a possibility for people to say, no, we don't want this provision. So the place we need to concentrate is Senators Peters, Senator Peters and Senator Slotkin. We don't know when the vote on the NDAA in the Senate will be. It's not this week. It's probably, it could be, a couple weeks, it could be a month away. You can learn more at Responsible Statescraft and an NGO called Adjust Policy. Both of those are following it very closely. So the focus is really on the Senate now.
And there's another question in the chat. Thank you, Chris. There's another question about, is virtual comment more effective than a comment via email? I don't have concrete proof on what emails, how effective they are, but I do know that the emails we've sent to legislators, they have taken note of those, and I would assume that MEDC also takes notes of those emails, but I still believe strongly that virtual or in person is always the best route. If you're able to do that, I would highly recommend a virtual comment or an in-person comment. I just feel it's more powerful.
Email is great if you're just not available to make a comment, or if you have something you want to, attach that's a significant item.
Yeah, you can do both. You can email,
True.
attach comments, and still do a virtual or in-person comment as well.
Mm-hmm. So there's another comment. Part of why MIBA wants these grants is to create relationships. They want more than the money. They want to shape our minds. Well put. Another one. I like the idea of allowing those who speak so passionately and personally about this to speak in person or virtually to allow the most time for the most impactful statements. I think we can't control how long people will have to speak. I don't think we can decide ahead of time which 19 people are the right 19 people, so it doesn't go above 20.
Yeah, I mean, a minute and a half, Steve, a minute and a half last time we went was it was still a decent time for us to make a very impactful statement. I mean, majority of us were able to say everything we wanted to in that minute and a half. So I think we all believe that packing the room virtually and in person is much stronger than having 19 people speak for 3 minutes. It's much, much more effective for us to pack that room and to flood over that boardroom into the lobby. That would be amazing. And then into the streets. That would be a real strong message if they haven't already gotten our message.
We have a question in the chat. Are there ways folks can coordinate carpools to Lansing if interested and able to join in person?
One possibility would be to use the Signal group if you're there. We did put the URL for the Signal for how to join into the chat.
We've done that before too, Kira. We've done carpooling, like informally. People have reached out to each other and said, can I hitch a ride with you? Can we drive together? And the Signal chat is also a wonderful tool to coordinate with others to do that. I'm sure there'll be volunteers who'll be okay with, carpooling. And it is accessible if you have a cane or wheelchair or walker, it is accessible to
Mhm.
enter the building and make a comment. They have parking very close to the building as well. It's metered parking, but it's very close.
Okay, and I think we have about 7 more minutes, so I don't know if this is a good time to maybe shift to questions that are more so about the public comment, or if folks wanted to get some more guidance on that. Okay.
Does anybody have any questions, like how to formulate what they should include or anything they've written up that they want to run by us? Also, that form that I dropped in the chat, the Google form about if you're coming to make a public comment in person, virtual, or email. I also, there's a question there that says if you want help, to just leave your phone number and I'll be happy to reach out to you or one of my other team members. But if anybody wants to go through anything right now, we're happy to.
And I will just add, I'll encourage folks to join the Signal group again, because the last time we had public comment, we sent like a sample script that you could use before public comment, and we will likely do that again so that you have some guidance on what to say